It is 9:30 and the January meeting of the Wood County Board of Supervisors will come to order. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. The clerk has taken roll. At this time, I would call upon Vice Chair Rosar for the invocation and ask the body to remain standing afterwards for our pledge of allegiance.
So Supervisor, okay, I think it's on. Okay, so Supervisor Zerflu was unable to come today, so I'm going to lead us in prayer. So if you would so join me, I would appreciate it. Oh, Father in heaven, we just thank you for this beautiful sunshine today, and even though it's cold, we thank you for the beauty of the day. Thank you for the opportunity to gather here today and to serve you and to serve the residents of Wood County. We thank you for your mercy and your grace, for your good health and that you give us, and we just ask that you would bless this time together as we gather to make policy and to conduct the business of the county. We pray for our men and women in the service and for the families who are left behind. We ask that you would help them to lean on you during difficult times. Thank you again for our county, for our country, for our state. We ask that you would bless all the people that are in leadership positions at all of those levels and help us as we serve you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Chair Roser. Minutes from December's meeting. Do we have a second for that? We have a motion and second on the approval of the December minutes. Is there any additions, subtractions, corrections to those minutes? If none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. Excusals today, we have Supervisor Zerflu, as Vice Chair Rosar mentioned. We have no resignations. Under appointments, reappointments, we have Supervisor Lightnum being appointed to the Central Sands Groundwater County Collaborative. And I would entertain a motion to approve that. We have a motion seconded regarding that appointment. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll take that by voice vote without objection. All in favor of that motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. Public comments at this time. Is there anyone wishing to make public comments this morning? Anyone here wishing to make public comments? Seeing none, we will move on to acknowledgments and recognitions. We have a number of those this morning, and at this time I would ask Director Ruink to come forward for some of his employees, please.
Good morning. This is one of my favorite times when we get to recognize our long-term employees, so I really appreciate the time. First, I would like to ask Julie Scarhut to come up. If Julie is here, she is. Okay. So, just a few words about Julie. Julie has been a youth justice social worker here with Wood County for the last 25 years. Over the course of that 25 years, I'm sure Julie can attest to the number of changes that we've seen. Not only for her moving from the social services department to the human services department, but just a challenge that we are seeing working with our youth day to day. And Julie has done an excellent job of adjusting and rolling with those changes. I also want to say that Julie is always one to step up and try to make our department a better place. We have a group that's come together called our Organizational Effectiveness Group, and Julie has participated in that group over the last 2 years, and that has been very much appreciated. I also want to leave you with some words from Julie's supervisor that kind of demonstrates exactly the type of work that she does. Julie has demonstrated an ability to complete thorough assessments, work with challenging youth and families, and provide reliable service to the residents of Wood County. Julie has been a valuable asset to the Youth Justice team and the Wood County Human Services Department. And just one final note on Julie's work, and that is she has taken the lead in working with our juvenile sex offenders, which is really a very tough population to work with, and she has taken that on and helped mentor some of our younger workers as they work with that population. So thank you, Julie. We really appreciate all that you've done and all that you will continue to do for our department and the children in our community. Thank you. Next, I'd like to recognize Brenda Orth. Unfortunately, Brenda is not able to be here today. Brenda has been with our department for 35 years, starting off with the Unified Services part of our department, which again became part of our Human Services Department. Brenda really keeps our operation going in regard to working with our psychiatrists and doctors. As you know, over the last couple of years, we've had a number of locum providers, and Brenda's job has been to train those doctors into our system so they're able to dictate and transcribe medical records. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but she's rolled with it. She's been up to every challenge that's come before her and done a nice job. She steps up when there's opportunities, when opportunities arise to volunteer, and that is greatly appreciated. I also want to just say a few words that her supervisor shared with me as well. She is one of the first to step up and address any challenges that come our way. She is funny, practical, has great ideas, and can make anything look like it came right out of a magazine. So I think that speaks to her attention to detail and desire to present our department in the best possible light. So I want to recognize Brenda. Even though she's not here, I will present her with this plaque as soon as possible. Thank you. And last, but certainly not least, we will be recognizing one of our longest term employees. I think Grace might be the longest tenured employee we have in our department at 40 years. So Grace has been with our department for 40 years, started in social services, transitioned to the Human Services Department. Grace has done an amazing job of working with our foster families. So main part of her job is recruiting foster homes and helping retain foster homes. One of the great challenges is not only recruiting them, but retaining our foster homes and providing them the support they need so they continue to provide service to the children in need in our community. Grace has been a vital part of planning all of our foster, our summer picnic and our winter picnic for foster family and foster youth. So it's a great event where kids come together, and it's just great to see them all come and play together with each other. And there's a great deal of planning that goes along with that, and Grace loves it. She shows her passion and her energy, and it's like she started yesterday. Her passion has never wavered for the work that she does. So it's really exciting to see that. We hope that Grace has got a little bit more left in the tank to give. I think she does. She certainly shares that energy with us on a daily basis. I also want to share a message from Grace's supervisor. Grace's kind heart and thoughtful attitude are certainly primary contributors to her very successful career here in Wood County. So, Grace, I want to thank you so much for all that you do for Wood County and the services you've provided to children and families throughout your 40-year career.
One final long-term employee to be recognized, and I would ask our Edgewater Administrator, Marissa Lair, to come forward for that, please.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to recognize Jennifer Garfield from Edgewater. She is one of our nighttime CNAs for her 30 years of service. 30 years is a very long time to work as a CNA. So in talking to her supervisors and her coworkers prior to this, they just share that she is a very dedicated and caring employee. Jennifer received her CNA certification when she was just 18 and has worked with Wood County since. So we are very thankful for long-term dedicated employees like her, and I will take this plaque back to Edgewater with me to present to her at a later time. So thank you for your time.
Thank you both for those presentations. We have one special order of business this morning, and I think we will take that right now at the beginning of the meeting. Supervisor Lightnum, would you like to do the honors here, please?
Sure. Morning. So our special order of business this morning is to welcome Kevin Mazarek. He's from the Center of Watershed Science at UW Stevens Point. And I'm going to digress for just a second, but I saw many of you in the audience January 6th at Nakusa at the high school auditorium when we talked about nitrate-contaminated private wells. One of the things that Assemblywoman Shanklin said at the very end of the article that many of you also read is that if you have questions about groundwater quality in central Wisconsin, ask Kevin. So what we want to do this morning is to give you a chance. I think his presentation will be about 15 minutes. We also want to open it up to your questions afterwards. So Kevin, with that, it's all yours.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. As stated, I want to give an overview.
Mr. Chairman, can we kill the lights up there a little bit so we can see those slides better?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing that. I want to make sure everybody has a good
The
view.
bottom button, Bill. There you go. Turn them on.
So while we're figuring out the light situation, what I hope to do today is just kind of give an overview of nitrate in Wisconsin's groundwater, helping people understand maybe where it comes from, why it's there, and then ultimately what we might be able to do to try and solve or address some of our nitrate issues in the state. So I'm going to actually start with my conclusions and then build off of those from here, but basically what I hope to convey today in the short time that I have is that current agricultural systems allow for significant nitrate losses to groundwater, even when we're doing things that we would consider to be optimal management practices. We also know that what we do during the growing season is important, but there's significant opportunities for nitrate to be lost outside our growing season in the state of Wisconsin. We also know that the soils and geologic conditions can exacerbate losses to groundwater, and we'll cover some of those today. And when it comes to future management priorities and challenges, we need to do a better job of encouraging certain practices, but also better quantifying what the impact of those management practices might be. Also important to recognize that climate change will make addressing nitrate contamination in the state of Wisconsin more challenging. And when I say climate change, what we're talking about is more extreme rainfall events, longer growing seasons, increased soil temperatures. All those things may exacerbate nitrate losses to groundwater. We also have to be more intentional about residential development with regards to those people that are on private wells. And this means where we locate people on private wells in proximity to agricultural areas, as well as the density of septic systems in rural development. So nitrate in groundwater, background levels of this particular contaminant, we would consider to be less than 1 milligram per liter. So if there weren't humans in the state of Wisconsin, we would expect background levels of this particular element to be less than 1 milligram per liter. When levels exceed 1 milligram per liter, that provides evidence of impacts. And when concentrations exceed 10 milligrams per liter, that's where we consider that drinking water or that water source to be unsuitable as a drinking water source for basically all populations, with the focus being on infants or women who are pregnant. These are the human health impacts associated with nitrate in drinking water. Again, primarily infants and women who are pregnant or may become pregnant are the target populations, but there's also health considerations focused on older adults as well, which is where the recommendation for everyone to avoid long-term consumption of nitrate above 10 comes from. The other thing about nitrate is that it's a great indicator of other potential contaminants. So if the source of that nitrate is agricultural related, there's a greater likelihood for that water to contain pesticides. If the source of that water is septic system effluent, there's a greater likelihood of that water to contain personal care products, pharmaceutical products, things that would go along with human wastewater. So nitrate, because it moves so easily, it's relatively inexpensive to test for. It's a very useful element for understanding what other tests might be important for people to consider. What do we know about nitrate in groundwater? A lot of it comes from people on private wells that have tested their wells over the years. This is a map showing a large amount of data for the state of Wisconsin. The blue dots are wells that test really low background levels of nitrate. The red dots are those that would exceed standards. This map is probably more alarming than it actually is, given that we've always mapped the maximum or the highest concentration on top. So just because an area is red doesn't mean that you can't get good groundwater quality there. There's probably a lot of blue dots or low levels underneath those red dots, which is why we have to look at that data in various ways. And one way to do that is to aggregate the data together. So this particular map is that same data. It's just aggregating or averaging the nitrate concentration by town range. So this is a graphic that comes from the Wisconsin Well Water Viewer. This is an online interactive tool that all of you would have access to if you have internet access. It allows you to interact with that data at a more detailed level. You can actually zoom into your community. You can draw circles around areas of interest, and it'll summarize information for you if you want to get a sense for water quality where you live. But basically the white areas on the map are areas where we don't have sufficient data. The other areas that are colored in represent areas that we feel comfortable that we would represent that area with an average concentration. With the lighter yellow or orange areas being low levels of nitrate, the darker areas representing higher levels of nitrate. And you can see that nitrate concentrations are not uniform across the state of Wisconsin. They are variable, and that variability is something that we'll explain in the next couple of slides. When we break down nitrate concentrations in the state of Wisconsin, again, 10 milligrams per liter is that drinking water standard. Roughly 1 in 10 wells in the state of Wisconsin exceed that nitrate standard. When we talk about higher concentrations, 20 milligrams per liter, there's only about 2% of wells statewide that exceed that level. Then when we start talking 25, 30, 40 milligrams per liter, it's important to realize that those are really rare instances. So when we see or find levels of nitrate in private wells above 20 milligrams per liter, there's things going on there that are leading to really unusual or high concentrations of nitrate. And there's not a lot of people exposed to nitrate at those levels, and they deserve special attention to try and figure out either how to improve or reduce nitrate levels in groundwater in those areas, or how to get those people safe water sources. When it comes to explaining the nitrate variability across the state, it is a function of land use as well as the soils and geology. So again, agricultural areas represent the most significant contribution of nitrate to groundwater. You'll see that northern Wisconsin, which is mostly forested, has really low concentrations, even though we consider northern Wisconsin to have fairly susceptible geology to groundwater contamination. Those forested areas are good for groundwater quality. In other areas, again, the soils in eastern Wisconsin, it's a geology which we call karst, makes eastern Wisconsin more susceptible. And here, more locally in central Wisconsin, it would be the sandy soils or the sand and gravel aquifers outlined in the orange on the bottom middle slide here. So central Wisconsin, the Central Sands area, lower Wisconsin River Valley, areas along the Mississippi River Valley. Those are areas, because of the geology that we know, make them more prone to nitrate contamination. And that's reflected in the nitrate groundwater quality map that we see there. More specifically, if we zoom into Wood County, this is just a zoomed in portion of that data. Again, comes from the Wisconsin Well Water Quality Viewer. But in Wood County, we would estimate that about 6% of the wells in Wood County exceed that nitrate health standard, with it being concentrated in certain parts of the county. So we again know that there are certain parts of Wood County that will be more susceptible to this particular contaminant in the groundwater, and that's reflected in our data. The maximum concentration of nitrate in Wood County that has been found is 74.5 milligrams per liter in a private well. So wide-ranging concentrations. That represents about 5,400 samples that have been collected over the past 30 or so years that contributes to this particular slide. Where does nitrate come from? Again, it's agricultural systems supply nitrogen because we know that adding nitrogen will increase yield. So this particular slide has yield on the left or the y-axis, and the x-axis or the bottom axis is the fertilizer added. So we know as you add nitrogen fertilizer, you're going to increase yields up to a certain point. That point at which adding more nitrogen doesn't result in any additional yield is called the yield optimum. We know that the economic optimum is always going to be slightly less than maximum yield, because eventually you reach a point where you're paying more for that additional fertilizer than you're getting back in additional yield or profit. Everybody wants to know, what is the environmental optimum? And the state of Wisconsin has really yet to decide what is an environmental optimum amount of nitrogen to apply, because we know that would vary depending on the year. Each year is going to be different in terms of how much fertilizer costs, what people are getting for their commodities. It might vary depending on weather. It's also going to vary depending on who you are. If you're a woman who's pregnant, your idea of what that environmental optimum would be different than somebody who might be making their living from farming. So environmental optimum is kind of a challenging thing to define, and I think something that the state is still trying to struggle with. Well, we know that different crops will respond to fertilizer differently. So there are crops that require a lot more fertilizer than others. Things like corn and potato are on the far right or high end of nitrogen recommendations. Things like soybeans and alfalfa are on the very low end. So what this means is that each crop requires a different amount of nitrogen, and we know that each crop we'd expect a certain amount of nitrate to leach based on the cropping system. So those crops like corn and potato, which need a lot of nitrogen, studies would show that they tend to leach more nitrogen as well. If we go down to, let's say, a corn-soybean rotation, we know that would leach a little bit less nitrogen than, let's say, corn on corn every year. If we diversify that rotation even more, say grow corn one year, soybeans the next year, followed by oats, alfalfa, and another year of alfalfa, we would expect the concentration of nitrate to decrease as a result of that mixed or more diverse cropping rotation. And then if we went to perennial systems, prairie grasses, things like switchgrass, miscanthus, forested areas, we would expect those systems to leach even less nitrogen. So when it comes to nitrate in groundwater in the state of Wisconsin, we know that that's relatively predictable based on what cropping systems are in place and the soils and the geology that we might find in those regions. When it comes to improving groundwater quality, again, even in areas where we're farming exactly as UW Extension would recommend, we would expect some loss. How do we improve it? And that's really the main question that people are asking these days. There's things that we know are good, looking at improving the timing, various things that we can add to reduce losses. But things that we know would be even better would be the implementation of cover crops. And the best would be looking at different rotations, extended rotations, more perennial systems. It's easy for me to sit up here and say that, but the reality of farmers growing more switchgrass, miscanthus, is pretty limited given that there's no market for those crops. So even though we know these things would work from a scientific standpoint, from a societal standpoint, there needs to be changes in how we think about these systems, how we manage these systems, and that's not always realistic given the current climate that we're in. But from a science standpoint, what I would say is nitrate is well understood. We know what the major causes are. We know what the major or solutions could be, but it's sometimes challenging to implement those. This previous slide would be looking at it from improving the groundwater system or reducing how much ends up in the groundwater. It's important to know that even what we do today, it might take years or decades to notice measurable improvement into the groundwater system. So in order to get people safe water today, we also have to consider shorter term solutions. A lot of times that's going to be water treatment, well construction, modifications. All those things come at a cost, and it's important to recognize what those costs are going to be. And sometimes those costs to certain populations may be significant. So I'll leave it with this last summary slide again. Our nitrate challenge really comes down to that top foot. How do we manage nitrogen in agricultural systems to keep it in that root zone, in the area of the soil where plants have a possibility of interacting with it in a way that minimizes how much ends up in groundwater. So I'll leave it at that, and if there's time for questions, I'll defer to the chair.
Are there any questions for Kevin? Supervisor Plum.
Thank you, Kevin. Great presentation. Do we have access to that as a PowerPoint, or is that just information can you provide that for us?
I can definitely, I'll confer with whoever I need to in the PowerPoint. I'd be happy to send to anybody that wants it.
Thank you.
Supervisor Ashby.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. I only see two solutions to this problem myself. One is the consultation like you're talking about. But we haven't got the market here to see for alfalfa and that, or else we're going to have to leave some of the land way. We're pushing our ground too hard with the crops we're using. It's just too much for what the land can handle for what we're putting on the land. By leaving this acres like a cornfield over summer, we although we're farming less acres and we got this cover crop, but we need to.
Supervisor Lightman, then Vice Chair Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to leave everybody with a little cause for optimism here. Our January 6th panel in Nakusa was subtitled Science and Solutions. Okay, so now you've heard the science, and then Kevin talked about some of the solutions. I want to expand on that just a little bit more. When Mark Borchardt from USDA spoke, he talked about the Denmark model. And one of the things I heard him say to the audience in Nakusa, and then I heard him say backstage later on, is that in Denmark, they've been doing this for 10 years. And he said, same latitude, same soils, and it's been working there. Now, if you listen carefully, you heard Kevin mention at least 2 of what they're doing in Denmark. I think there's 7 points. I'm not going to go through those with you. But I wanted you to know that there is cause for optimism, even though we're going to have this problem probably for decades. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that on page 91 of your packet, there is a link easily to click on to where you can watch that panel discussion. It really only went about 80 minutes, 80 or 85 minutes. So just click the link on page 91. Thank you.
Vice Chair Wilson.
So Karen, I have a question. I've heard over the weeks that, and I noticed on that far end of your slide that it was the corn and the things that people cash crop that require a lot of nitrogen application. Can you speak to the industry standard of nitrate application with those cash crops? Because the phrase that I heard was people want pretty vegetables. And you need that kind of an application to get those pretty vegetables. And so there might be an over application in order to get a good crop, in order to make those crops pretty and meet what the consumer is expecting for the quality of the crop. Is there any justification for that?
So the question was about industry standards, and what I'd say is that the one slide showing nitrogen fertilizer rates, those would be what we consider to be kind of industry standards for what's applied based on crop optimal yield recommendations. When it comes to making things look pretty, that's important for certain crops like potatoes, probably less important for things like corn. Corn is those recommendations are based primarily on yield optimums or yield goals. Different vegetables, potatoes probably the one that for central Wisconsin is most important to consider with regards to making it look pretty. A lot of the other things that we grow here, sweet corn, peas is a very low nitrogen input cropping system, so that's less critical. But potatoes for sure, the industry is not gonna, it's gonna be much more difficult for them to apply less and meet the market specifications for that particular crop, both from a nitrogen standpoint as well as a water quantity standpoint. Those systems are managed quite differently than something like corn. So there is variability to those situations based on what's being grown that do make it challenging to apply kind of a one-size-fits-all solution to that question. But what I will say is that diversification of the landscape, there are ways to implement solutions that don't mean not farming in central Wisconsin. I would never stand up here and say that we shouldn't be farming in central Wisconsin. There are ways that we can have very productive agricultural systems and still maintain or try to improve groundwater quality in Wisconsin, and it involves a more holistic solution looking at managing the system for multiple years while still allowing those producers to manage optimally for the certain high value crops that they've come to rely on. So I share Bill's optimism, but it involves diving deeper into this issue and maybe looking at it more holistically than we have in the past. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does, thank you, I appreciate your perspective.
Supervisor Clendenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I gotta say, in fighting clean water and nitrates, especially since the 60s, I found, and I'm proud of the fact that Wood County is where it is today and how we've moved on this in the last 2 years. And I have a consortium of different 6 counties on this, and I'm very proud. And this is probably one of the most concise, complete presentations I've ever seen. Thank you.
Supervisor Curry, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've served on SEED for 8 years. This is my 4th term on the board. If you want to do something about water quality or nitrates, and I want to thank Kevin for the presentation. I've heard him several times at the SEED meeting and several presentations. He's probably one of the experts in Wisconsin. We're going to rely more on the university system in the future for how we're going to solve this problem. But if you want to do something, since I've been chairman of SEED the past 2 years, is talk to the public about testing your water. Now, if you're in a municipal system, you get a report by statute every year. You're probably just like I was before I was on SEED. You don't pay attention to it. What difference does it make? but you should know what you're putting in your body. If you're not just on a rural system, but if you're on a private well, it's important to test your water at least yearly. And Kevin brought up something today, climate is making a difference. In the last couple of years, we've had tremendous rain that we didn't have. It was just 3 or 4 years ago, we were in drought. So that changes. You can't just test it once and say you're fine. At least the county should provide the ability to know what you're drinking. The solution, I agree, is going to be long-term, but whoever you talk to, if they're on a private well, please talk to them about testing your water. Thank you.
Any other questions for Kevin from the board? Seeing none? Thank you, Kevin. Thanks. Good stuff. And that will get us into the packet. Starting on page 12, those referrals have been passed along to the proper committees. Pages 13 through 16, we have minutes from the executive committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Clendenning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 14, number 7, I believe it is, talks about strategy plan for the county. And it was brought up at our executive meeting, and if you read this, I thought there would be a presentation on all the meetings that have went on since then about county strategy. And I've been one to blame because chairman of the committee, Judicial and Legislative Committee, apparently with the judges and clerk of courts and child support and those that we oversee, there wasn't much consideration of it. And I'm kind of getting blamed for not including those people in trying to get a strategy. I think strategy for the whole county board should be put off until the next year, the next group of people for the county board. I really think we ought to sit down as 19 members. There'll probably be as much as 5 new members there could be on the board. And I think there's where we should talk about strategy about the whole county board. I've been watching for years how strategy planning has went on in the health department, and it's good. Every year they have a plan and they upkeep it. So instead of us spending a lot of time and money, and it's only spent with one supervisor on the county board and department heads and things like that, I think this should really be put off until the next county board after it gets elected. Thank you.
Pages 17 through 25, we have the Renewable and Sustainable Committee minutes. Administrative Coordinator's Report on page 26. County Clerk, 27. Human Resources, pages 28 through 32. Information Technology, 33 through 36. Facilities Manager on page 37. Treasurer on 38. And that brings us to our first resolution on page 39, brought by Health and Human Services and Executive Committee, and I would ask the clerk to read that, please.
This will be Resolution 20-1-1, to amend the 2019 Veterans WDVA grant budget to include monies that were moved and excluded from the original budget. Fiscal note, no additional cost to Wood County. The transfer totals $442 even.
We have a motion on the floor and seconded regarding the resolution. Is there any discussion on that motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please vote. And that resolution passes unanimously. Thank you. That takes us to page 40 in our second resolution, also brought by Health and Human Services and the Executive Committee. I would ask the clerk to read that as well.
This will be Resolution 20-1-2, to create .97 FTE economic support worker position. Fiscal note, anticipated wages and benefits based upon a grade 6 step 1, total $60,417.37.
We have a motion on the floor and seconded regarding that resolution. Is there any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion passes 18-1. Thank you. That takes us to page 41, and we have Health and Human Services Committee minutes on pages 41 and 42. Health Department on 43 through 46. Human Services, pages 47 through 52. Veterans on page 53. Public Safety Committee minutes on pages 54 through 58. Coroner, 59 and 60. Humane Officer, pages 61 through 65. Sheriff's Rescue, 66 through 70. Sheriff's Department, pages 71 through 88. Seed Committee minutes on pages 89 through 94. Golden Sands, RC&D, pages 95 through 105. Land and Water Conservation, 106 through 110. Planning and Zoning, pages 111 through 114. Economic Development Roundtable on pages 115 through 120. Citizens Groundwater, 121 through 124. UW Extension, 125 through 129. Which brings us to our third resolution on page 130, brought by the Seed Committee, and I would ask the clerk to read that, please.
This will be Resolution 20-1-3, to approve a zoning amendment to the Town of Grand Rapids zoning map. Fiscal note, no cost to Wood County. The Town of Grand Rapids is responsible for any costs associated with administering their town zoning ordinance.
We have a motion on the floor and seconded regarding that resolution. Is there any discussion on the resolution, or motion, I'm sorry? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion passes 18-1. Thank you. Takes us to page 131, and there is all the information regarding that zoning request on 131 through 133. Judicial and Legislative Committee minutes on pages 134 through 140. Criminal Justice Task Force minutes 141 and 142. Residential Options Committee minutes on page 143. Criminal Justice Coordinator Ad Hoc Committee on pages 144 through 146. 147, there is a notice of injury and claim. Corp Counsel is on page 148, unusually short report from the council this morning. Child Support on 149. Register of Deeds 150 through 153. Highway Infrastructure and Recreation Committee on 154 and 155. Highway Commission, pages 156 through 159. Parks and Forestry, 160 through 164. And that takes us to page 165 in our fourth resolution, brought by the Highway Infrastructure and Recreation Committee and Executive Committee. And I would ask the clerk to read that, please.
This will be Resolution 20-1-4, to approve the 2020 Wood County Forest Annual Work Plan. Fiscal note, potential loss of state aid revenues of $48,935.
We have a motion on the floor and seconded regarding that resolution. Is there any discussion on that motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Takes us to page 166, and you see that 2020 work plan for Parks and Forestry, and that is on pages 166 through 175. Central Wisconsin State Fair Board of Directors, 176 and 177. McMillan Library Board of Trustees, 178 through 181. South Central Library System Board of Trustees, pages 182 through 185. County of Wood Library Board, pages 186 and 187. That brings us to page 188, our fifth resolution, and I would ask the clerk to read that, please.
This will be Resolution 20-1-5, to approve the fire warden list for 2020. Fiscal note, none.
We have a motion on the floor and seconded regarding that resolution on page 188. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. That takes us to the last page of our packet and a resolution regarding the recognition of our long-term employees. I would ask the clerk to read that.
This will be Resolution 20-1-6, to recognize these Wood County employees listed below for years of devoted and faithful service to Wood County.
We have a motion on the floor and seconded regarding that resolution. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, and I believe we can do this on a voice vote without objection from the floor. All those in favor of that motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. And that passes unanimously, I believe. And that brings us to the end of our packet today. Is there anything else that needs to come before this body this morning? Supervisor Clendenny.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I see that in the minutes of the executive board meeting that our next meeting for the executive board is going to be on the 4th of February.
That was changed.
To the 3rd, right? Okay, thank you.
Because of legislative changes. Okay, anything? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, you've noticed the head that's behind me to my right. I'd like to introduce Marathon County Clerk Kim Trueblood. She is with us today along with her IT person, Jean, sitting next to Supervisor Hahn, looking over the iPad voting system because they're considering going with it. And isn't it wonderful? It works so much better today than last time. So, just wait until next one. Kim's not here. So I just want to take a moment to introduce her.
Again, Supervisor Hamilton.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if we don't have a copyright on this, they can't pay us a derivative or whatever you call it, thing, no?
You should buy me a drink at the conference.
There you go, have that, that
That's
works
cheap
out.
training.
That works out.
That's cheap training people. Once again, anything else that needs to come before this body this morning?
Marathon clerk looks
If-
a lot better on TV than Mr. Minor.
Now that is not true.
If
You gonna buy him a drink now?
if there is
I've got a
nothing
little something
else,
special for Supervisor Zerflu.
Here it comes.
if there is nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Second, we have a motion on the floor and second to adjourn. All in favor of that indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Stay warm.